Konbanwa, Annyeong, hola, hi. Yo soy Malia y me encanta hablar, pues con un poco de agua, algunos bocadillos y siéntate conmigo, por favor. 先週は英語を見ました. Kite kudasai. This segment on my channel is called Malia's Mementos, and it's going to be my take on the traditional movie review breakdown type of thing. I think it'll flow better for me than rating or reviewing a movie necessarily, because if there's a movie I felt passionate enough to make a video about, the video almost acts as a souvenir to that movie. So it kind of makes more sense to talk about it through that lens for me than like, oh, it got this many points for cinematography or whatever, you know. Essentially, at the end of my breakdown of the movie, I'm going to explain a scene or a moment or line or something that happened in the movie that made me be like, oh, I want to talk about this. And I think that'll be more fun. So I hope you enjoy. So today we're going to be talking about the movie Candyman, the 1992 version, the OG. For the start of Summerween, you're probably wondering, Candyman 1992? それは何ですか? Like, what's that? Well, Candyman 1992 is a horror movie, and it is about a black antagonist, and it's amazing. Cast in this movie that you may or may not recognize include Tony Todd, rest in peace to Tony Todd, include Xander Berkeley, Cassie Lemons, and Virginia Madsen. The Candyman, a murderous soul with a hook for a hand, is accidentally summoned to reality by a skeptic grad student researching the monster's myth. Spooky. What's blood for, if not for shedding? So at the start of this film, we actually get the title sequence, and in the background of the title sequence, we get this busy highway, and then at the end of the title sequence, we get Tony Todd's stunning voice acting with Candyman saying, "They will say I have shed innocent blood." What's blood for, if not for shedding? With my hook for a hand, I'll split you from your groin to your gullet. This is just the absolutely most perfect way to introduce an antagonist. I have no words. Now, this highway is going to play a huge role in the rest of the film, so the fact that it's pretty much casually in the background of the title sequence is so... Who is Candyman? Bees flood the city and we hear a woman scream, and then we cut to our protagonist. Our protagonist is conducting interviews with her partner. So her interviewee is telling her about something that happened in Moses Lake, Indiana. There was a girl named Clara who was babysitting, and she invited a boy named Billy over so they could, you know, do rated R things to each other. When Billy gets there, before they woohoo, because apparently Clara was known to be a tease, she would be with a lot of men but never actually like sleep with them. So she went into the bathroom mirror and she told the man about Candyman. And she explains that Candyman, he has a hook in the stub of his right hand. And if you say his name 5 times in the mirror, he'll appear behind you, breathing down your neck. My immediate reaction to this was like, what's hot about playing Candyman in the mirror before? Like you're anyways, I questioned what was hot about it, and then I immediately got my question answered because Claire said, well, no one's ever gotten past 4 when the two of them were saying Candyman in the mirror. They stopped at 4. But apparently the other people that she does this little game with don't get to 4, so that's a little bit of a turn on for her, whatever that means. So because Billy was so brave and he ended up saying Candyman 4 times, beating the record of any other guy, she tells him to go downstairs to wait for a surprise. And before she goes downstairs, she turns into the mirror and she says Candyman the 5th and final time. And he appears behind her and kills her. Billy hears the commotion, he leaves, he survives, but after he witnessed or experienced this, he went crazy, and the baby that Claire was babysitting, that baby is dead. We learn that our protagonist goes to the University of Chicago. She walks into a lecture where we can hear a professor lecturing about modern oral folklore. The professor is explaining how modern oral folklore represents fears of urban society. And because I watched this, I had to rent the movie to watch it. I was able to pause it while I was watching it and look in the background. And I noticed on the blackboard in the classroom, it says, common among neighborhood legends, some truth, victim seeking, revenge, forbidden area, deformities, and appliances. After finishing up the lecture, we learned that the protagonist's name is Helen, and she's actually married to the professor. She just didn't show up late to class, which is what I thought when I first watched it when I was younger. The professor introduces Helen to some of his, I think they're his graduate students. He says they're the top students that he has. And there's a girl within the group who's a little bit clingy to him, and she's very suspicious, and Helen clocks that tea. But when she confronts who we later learn to be Trevor, when she confronts Trevor about it, Trevor kind of just laughs it off. He's like, oh, you don't think I would never do that to you? Like, what are you talking about? Ha ha. Ha ha. Hell. After being brushed off for her suspicions about Stacy, Helen goes on to say as well, to criticize Trevor for lecturing about urban legends, because she's actually conducting research about urban legends, and if she's interviewing the students that are taking a course on urban legends or folklore and being taught about urban legends, it will skew her data and her results, and it might affect how her thesis comes out. But Trevor says he has to stick to and prioritize his students' curriculum and education, and it's kind of just brushed off from there. So Helen is sitting in a classroom and she's transcribing the interview recordings that she received, and she's laughing about the stories that she's hearing about Candyman. While she's doing this, there's cleaning ladies, just doing their jobs, and one of the cleaning ladies overhears her listening to things about Candyman, and she gives her little 2 cents. Cleaning lady Henrietta Mosley tells Helen that Candyman is at Cabrini Green Projects, and she only knows that because she has a cousin that lives in Cabrini Green. And all I have to say about that is that black people always know somebody somewhere about something that might also be their cousin. Miss Mosley gets her friend Kitty Culver to come and speak to Helen as well about Candyman, because she seems to know a little bit more about it. Miss Culver is first talking about Ruthie Jean. Ruthie Jean was a victim of a horrendous murder. Her murderer never been caught. Doesn't even seem like people are looking for him. And Miss Culver shares that she knows the story about Ruthie Jean, which is that Ruthie Jean apparently was hearing something in the walls, like something trying to break through the walls, and she called 911. Nobody believed her, and they found her dead. She was killed with a hook. They found her dead, killed with a hook. But after sharing what very little that she knows, Miss Culver says, but I don't know nothing about that, and they promptly leave. And I know that's right. I know. So after learning about a specific event or person, victim, Ruthie Jean, Helen goes and looks at old newspaper clippings to try to see if she can verify the information, and she actually does find a clipping about the murder of Ruthie Jean. Of course, as a typical white woman, when she finds this, although it's about a gruesome murder and racial injustice, she gets very excited.
It just appears to be just a little bit ghetto to me. A little bit ghetto, a little bit hood.
Giddy about it, and she runs to her partner, her research partner Bernadette, to share this newfound information that they can use in their paper. However, when Bernadette hears about this, she's less excited, and she actually outright tells Helen that she's sick for using or being excited about this Ruthie Jean story, because Ruthie Jean was a real person and victim. After showing the newspaper clippings, Helen also explains to Bernadette that Cabrini Green used to be, less dangerous, less full of crime than it is now, showing her pictures that are of the same type of neighborhood and the same buildings, but they look completely different and have completely different crime rates. And basically, what Helen and Bernadette are saying about Cabrini Green is that niggas get shot every day out there. Helen goes on to explain further that she lives in the Lincoln Projects, which are just old Cabrini Green project apartments that were, painted over, priced up, and sold as condominiums. And here we learn about the gentrification and the redlining within Chicago between Cabrini Green and Lincoln Projects. And basically, Helen explains what gentrification and redlining are and how they're actively affecting Cabrini Green. Essentially, there are these things called barriers. There aren't any barriers between the Lincoln Projects and the Gold Coast, unlike how there are barriers between the wealthy and the poor in other parts of Chicago due to the usage of barriers such as the L train and the highway that was shown earlier in the title sequence. So essentially, with minor alterations to the Lincoln Projects, they were then sold as condominiums to people that were moving into transplants. They were sold to the transplants, the ones that are either going to university or just moving to Chicago to start a life, that were able to pay those high prices that people that lived in the Cabrini Green Projects would not have been able to pay. Helen takes Bernadette to the restroom and pulls out her medicine cabinet, showing how the other apartment across from her is accessible through the medicine cabinet, which is crazy to me. And this is essentially explaining how someone got into Ruthie Jane's apartment because they broke through her mirror to kill her. You don't believe all that nonsense, do you? Helen asks Bernadette if she believes in Candyman, to which Bernadette responds that she doesn't. So they both look into the mirror and they decide to play the game. However, Bernadette stops at 4, while Helen proceeds to say the full 5 Candymans. I just realized the angle I'm filming from, I'm right in front of a mirror, and I've been saying Candyman.
Don't die. You're so cute. Oh my god.
Helen gets a little bit offended, and she's like, not offended, but Helen is like, oh my gosh, why would you do that? And Bernadette just laughs it off, saying it's better safe than sorry. And again, I know that's right, because I would not, I don't play games like that, no. Later that night, Helen hears noises in the apartment. Turns out it's just Trevor who ends up scaring her, because he's randomly coming home at like 3 in the morning. So the highway is shown again, and at this point, I consider it a motif of fear. Whenever you see the highway, you should be very afraid, essentially. Helen and Bernadette are driving to Cabrini Green, and Bernadette is definitely strapped up with that mace, and they're both dressed as undercover cops. Mind you, for further context, Cabrini Green and Lincoln Projects are only 8 blocks away. And this is the disparity between the crime rate, as well as the economic gap. On the ride to Cabrini, Bernadette is warning Helen about the dangers of going there, telling her about the gangs and all of that stuff. And she's kind of wanting to turn back, but Helen convinces both of them that it's worth it for their thesis because it'll make their thesis more representative and a bunch of other academia stuff. Like it'll be good for their reputations. Once Helen and Bernadette get to Cabrini Green, it's very clear that the boys are definitely working that block, and as soon as they see the 2 women, they immediately start harassing them, following them. It's not. Back that shit up. Now, while Bernadette is petrified about being there, Helen feels safe enough because the gang members think that her and Bernadette are police. So they just go about exploring somebody's trenches. While they're going throughout the apartment building, Helen is taking a bunch of photos, which I wonder if that is ethical or even legal, because she definitely doesn't have permission from anybody to take those photos. She's just taking a bunch of them. In fact, one of the residents that lived there, Helen was taking a photo of their entire front door, and the resident opens the door and has her dog barking. And then she sees who it is. It's another white person trying to take advantage of, where I live every fucking day. Slams the door right back in her face. Helen and Bernadette make their way to the apartment where Ruthie Jean was unfortunately murdered in, and apparently it's very stanky in there. The Lincoln Projects and the Cabrini Green Projects building formats are literally the same because they're within an 8-block radius of each other. So, when I say they enter the crime scene, I'm only talking about from one side of the mirror. So, Helen is actually wanting to go to the bathroom through the medicine cabinet to see the more active crime scene, because technically both apartments are the crime scene. It's just a matter of which apartment she was killed in, but both of them are closed off and both of them smell, and I would assume going into the crime scene would smell worse. But Helen wants to go, and Bernadette is not about that life, so she tells Helen, you have 5 minutes. Helen very comfortably takes off her coat, gives it to Bernadette, who then proceeds to drop it on the floor before then picking it up and putting it on the dirty ass tub to sit on and wait for Helen. Helen goes through the medicine cabinet, she's taking a bunch of pictures, and my literal favorite shot of the movie happens at 23 minutes and 50 seconds, where Helen is seen climbing out of a graffiti of Candyman's mouth. When she climbs through, she finds a pile of candy, to which she discovers have razors in them. Once she's done investigating, Helen and Bernadette need a cold cigarette to ease the pain. They smoke cigarettes so much in this movie. It's like every few scenes somebody is resident from earlier who opened the door and had her dog. Her name is Anne-Marie. Anne-Marie is seemingly willing to talk to Helen and Bernadette, but she's very suspicious and skeptical of their intentions. She tells Helen and Bernadette that they don't belong here and they shouldn't just be going through people's apartments. Anne-Marie questions how Helen and Bernadette are going to write about black people and the people of Cabrini Green in their thesis before eventually accepting the offer to be interviewed. However, before she accepts the offer, she does clarify that not every black person is the same. Not all of us are criminals or gangbangers. She says, not all of us are like them. So Anne-Marie invites Helen and Bernadette into her apartment, and Helen is way more personal than Bernadette. Bernadette seems to not want to have any type of direct skin contact with any surface in the apartment, while Helen is just casually, she's there, whatever. Now, this is the part of the film where I was kind of confused. I don't know if Anne-Marie is the person that called 911 and the story, the oral folklore was just that Ruthie Jean was calling and nobody believed her, or if it was really Ruthie Jean who called and nobody believed her. But Anne-Marie explains that she's the one that heard sounds and that she called the police, but nobody believed her, nobody came, and then the next day Ruthie Jean's body was found dead and she was killed with the hook. So now Anne-Marie is very scared all the time and she's just praying for the safety of her baby Anthony. Now it seems that Helen is slowly getting more and more under Candyman's influence because she's thinking about him and everything that she's been hearing about him while she's at dinner with Trevor, Bernadette, and Trevor's work colleague Purnell. She's kind of dissociating at dinner right now. You're probably wondering, who the hell is Purnell? Purnell is a colleague of Trevor's that has written his own piece about Candyman before. He can act as both a great mentor but also competition for Helen and Bernadette because they're both in academia trying to write about the same topic. Purnell says that he can read and help them with their thesis, but Helen doesn't want any of his help. She wants to keep all of their research separate until it's published. And Bernadette kind of backs her up, but kind of also spills everything because Purnell didn't know exactly that their thesis was going to be about Candyman specifically. And Bernadette kind of gave that information up when she said, "Oh yeah, we just went to Cabrini Green." Anyone who would know about urban folklore would know that Candyman is from Cabrini Green. So Purnell goes on to say, oh, you're doing something about Candyman. Well, you know, did you read my paper about Candyman? To which Bernadette and Helen both say, no. And Purnell goes on to explain his paper and the essential history of Candyman. Candyman was the son of an enslaved person who eventually made wealth off of designing a shoemaker. As the result of this, Candyman grew up going to the best schools. He grew up in polite society. He went to school to be an artist, focusing specifically on portraiture. And he got to a level of wealth and success that he was asked to paint a portrait for a wealthy white man of his beautiful white virginal daughter. And, well, Candyman fell in love with her. They were discovered, and her father sought revenge on Candyman for corrupting his daughter. The father wanted revenge for Candyman corrupting his daughter and also interracial pregnancy because she got pregnant. And so he called his boys to kill Candyman. And beyond just killing him, they sawed off his right hand, stuck a hook in it, took off all his clothes, covered him in honeycomb, let bees sting him to death, set his body on fire, scattered his ashes around Cabrini Green. Helen is back in Cabrini Green again. She can't find Anne-Marie, but she does come across this boy named Jake. Jake straight up tells Helen, I don't know nothing. And all I can stand to think is, why is Helen trying to interview a child? There are ethical and unethical ways to conduct research, and this is all kind of unethical, but it's not surprising because Helen is a white woman. Helen continues to try to get Jake to help her and offer her some useful information, but Jake kind of explains that he's scared of Candyman, the whole neighborhood is, and he doesn't want to help her and then have to deal with Candyman after. But Helen manipulates him and tells him, well, it'll just be our little secret. And so Jake leads her throughout the Cabrini Green projects to a crime scene, or otherwise known as the restroom. On their way to the restroom, though, they pass a bonfire, and Helen asks, what's that for? And Jake explains that, it's just for the party later, which is foreshadowing. So Jake takes Helen to the bathroom and explains that here is where a boy got attacked. But basically, the boy was originally with his mother at the store, but he really had to pee, so his mother sent him to the restroom while she finished up in the store. Everyone heard him screaming, and eventually they found him with his genitals cut off, holding his groin, laid out in a pool of blood on the floor. After hearing this gruesome story, Helen says, perfect opportunity for me to take my fucking pictures. Now, earlier in the movie, Helen was taking pictures outside of Anne-Marie's apartment, and outside of the apartment was graffiti that read, "Sweets to the Sweet." Now, in this restroom, which is also very stanky apparently, Helen is taking pictures of, well, it's the same phrase, "Sweets to the Sweet," but it's not in graffiti this time. No, this time the medium is shit. There's another sign with shit pointing to the toilet, which for some reason Helen decides to open, which is crazy to me, but I mean, this whole thing has been crazy in the first place, so I shouldn't be surprised. And she finds a bunch of bees just in the toilet and slams the lid back shut. Then she tries to leave the restroom, but the gang members that saw her enter earlier corner her in the bathroom, and it's not looking good for her. And if you're wondering where Jake is right now, he's still outside of the bathroom. He actually saw the gang members walk in there, and he didn't say nothing. So gang members corner Helen, and one of them says, "We're here looking for Candyman, bitch." Well, you found him. And then they proceed to jump her. To which Helen immediately goes to that precinct, She gets assistance. She correctly voice identifies the person that said that thing to her before she got jumped in the bathroom. And Cabrini Green is also on lockdown. The police actually think they caught the serial killer, like the killer that's been killing people in Cabrini Green, like Ruthie Jean. They think the person that assaulted Helen is the same person that was killing all of these other black people. And if that's not racial injustice, I don't know what is. Now, Ellen's eye is fucked up, and she and Jake are in the precinct, and Jake is feeling very betrayed because earlier Helen said it would just be their little secret. Clearly it's not their little secret if they're in the precinct, and Jake explains that he's scared that Candyman will get him, to which Helen explains Candyman is not real and everything will be okay because, well, the bad guy's in jail. Trevor comes home to Helen cooking him a romantic dinner, and her eye is a lot better than we initially saw it. Helen goes on to be woke and explain that so many black people were killed, but it wasn't until a white woman was simply assaulted that justice was served. Brenda is checking in on Helen after she was, assaulted, and she actually tells Helen, "Oh, you did such a good job. I actually was able to save the film that you had, and there's people that want to interview you, so things are looking up." Helen is in the parking lot walking to her car, and the real Candyman shows up while she's looking through her film, and again having no survival instincts or spatial awareness. And again, Tony Todd's voice acting her, absolutely stunning. Rest in peace again to Tony Todd. But it seems that Helen is under Candyman's spell, and the words are acting as a pull to him. And Tony Todd beautifully said, "Be my victim. I am the writing on the wall, the whisper in the classroom. Without these things, I am nothing." So after this interaction with Candyman at the parking lot, Helen wakes up in Anne Marie's apartment on the bathroom floor, covered in blood and holding a knife cleaver. Helen leaves the bathroom absolutely perturbed, not knowing what is going on, and we see the head of the dog from earlier has been cut off. Anne Marie is hysterical at baby Anthony's crib because he's not in the crib, and when she sees Helen, she attacks her and they start fighting. Helen knifes her with the cleaver on her arm, and then the police come in and arrest her. So Helen gets arrested and she's crying at intake, talking about, "Can I please take a shower? Can I please speak to Detective Memento?" And the intake person is just like, "Take it off. Do this. She don't give a damn, girl. She don't give a damn. The detective tells Helen that she's under arrest, to which she seems surprised about, and then he reads her Miranda rights. And there very clearly seems to be a shift from Helen being treated as the stereotypical white woman victim to being treated as the average criminal. Now, Helen gets her one phone call, calls home at 3 a.m., and does Trevor pick up? Of course not. The police take Helen back to interrogate her, and they want to know where baby Anthony is, but she really has no clue. She says that she blacked out, she can't remember anything. Helen makes bail, Trevor takes her home, to which there are plenty of reporters and angry citizens waiting outside of the precinct. Now, Helen's lawyer explains to her that the state is trying to charge her for first-degree murder, so if there's anything that she knows about the baby, she needs to tell somebody. Hi guys, it's editing Malia here. So the last 15 minutes of footage that I have for this video, the audio is fucked up. So I just decided I'm just gonna reshoot it and hope for the best. So where we last left off was saying that Helen didn't know where the baby was because she blacked out and the police were trying to press her about it. Next thing you know, Trevor and Helen are back in the apartment, and Trevor just says that he has to get up in the middle of the fucking night, mind you, to go to campus to quote unquote pick up some work. And if that's not suspicious, I don't know what is. So now that Helen is basically like bored and alone in the crib, she's going through the film that Bernadette was able to recover for her, and she sees that in one of the like mirror selfies she took in the like at the crime scene in the medicine cabinet, Candyman was behind her, and like that spooks her, so she stops looking at the film. But then she trudges her way to her bathroom, to her medicine cabinet mirror, and she's looking at it like she's expecting something. And then Candyman actually, Chinchot, appears at the medicine cabinet mirror. She's looking at it like she's expecting something, and Candyman actually breaks through the medicine cabinet mirror, to which she books it in the opposite direction and goes into the kitchen. She gets her phone and she tries to get a knife. She's trying to call 911, and apparently this is when I find out that Candyman can quite literally just fucking teleport, because he went from one end of the apartment to the other in no time. Don't even hear any footsteps. Be my victim. Believe in me. Be my victim. So after Helen goes and gets his kitchen knife and she's trying to call 911 and Candyman teleports and all that, he basically tells her it's either your life or baby Anthony's life, so you pick and choose type shit. And Candyman even goes on to basically explain that the reason he's doing this to her is because she destroyed faith in his congregation by, you know, getting a Candyman arrested, and it wasn't really him. So people stop fearing Candyman, and like the lore and the lesson of it all doesn't work anymore. Bernadette's being a good friend, and so she comes to Helen's apartment with like flowers, and she's knocking on the door, and Helen realizes like, oh shit, Bernadette's here. She tries to yell out for help, but before she can, Candyman like slits her throat, preventing her from speaking, and Bernadette finds her way in the apartment anyway, and she meets a not so swift death by Candyman. So as is a common occurrence in this movie, Helen passes out, wakes up somewhere, no recollection of how she got there. Helen wakes up, she's holding a knife, Trevor's the one that found her, and as is typical, we know once Helen blacks out and wakes up somewhere covered in blood and or she's holding a knife, someone or something has been murdered. So of course, after finding her, Trevor calls the cops. They're now treating the apartment like a crime scene, and Helen is stumbling out of what I don't remember what room she was in. Maybe it was her bedroom, I'm not really sure. But the main crime scene is in the living room, and she was not in the living room when she woke up. So she stumbles her way to the living room, and she sees the crime scene, and unfortunately she sees Bernadette is basically mutilated and dead on the floor. So of course, the police book her again, and on the ride to the precinct, Helen is continuously hearing Candyman's voice like deeper and louder. She's been hearing it more, like she's been hearing it subtly throughout the movie, but up until this point is when the voice kind of becomes louder than her own, I would say. And Candyman is saying things like, why do you want to live? It is a blessed condition to be whispered about, to live in other people's dreams, but not to have to be. So like I said earlier, while the voice is louder than hers, she still is solely focused on saving baby Anthony. Like that's all she's been plotting on from the point that she realized Candyman was real and she woke up and the baby was gone. So now the police take Helen to the psych ward, and she's tied to the bed, like arms and legs tied to the bed, leaving her completely defenseless to Candyman. So she just screams and screams and screams and screams. Like that's her final defense. While Helen is screaming her head off, Candyman is over here levitating over her bed, talking about like, can he get a kiss? Before the orderlies come in and sedate Helen. As is typical within a psych ward, no one believes anything that you say. So no one believes that Helen is like not making this whole Candyman story up. They think that she's just crazy. At this point in the film, I have in my notes, I'm just wondering if baby Anthony is starving or not. Like, how is Candyman feeding him? And if he is, how is he feeding him? Where is he getting the food from? Like, is he changing his diapers? What's going on? You're going to Disneyland. The nurses are waking Helen up to take her to therapy, and when she kindly asks them, where am I going? Like, where are we going? One of the orderlies say, Oh, you're going to Disneyland.
I'm having a panic attack right now. I need to calm the book down.
Now that she's in the room with the psychiatrist, Helen finds out that she's been in the psych ward for a month. She doesn't remember nothing. It's like she was there screaming, Candyman was asking for a kiss, and now she woke up and it's been a month. She also finds out that this psychiatrist is working for her defense team. So the psychiatrist recorded Helen's like events where she calls, I'm not gonna lie y'all, from this point on in the video, okay, because where I film, there's literally a mirror right here, like right here, like right here. And in my first recording of this, I was like, oh my gosh, I kept saying the guy's name, and I'm not saying it directly into the mirror, but the mirror is right there. I'm not gonna lie, it's 12 a.m. I also just rewatched like Oculus, so the whole mirror thing, no, we're just gonna start saying Tony Todd or the antagonist because I can't. I'm sorry. So Helen is shown the recording of her like yelling and screaming out the antagonist's name and thrashing around about being scared, and there's literally nobody there. She can't believe her eyes, and then she kind of like realizes like, oh, that's real footage. So she starts breaking down and she says like, oh, I can't believe this, like I could never do that, like I'm not capable of that, I can never do that to Bernadette. And while she's breaking down, she says to the psychiatrist like, I can actually prove that like the antagonist is real, I can prove it. So she says his name 5 times in the mirror, he appears, he kills the psychiatrist, breaks her out of the restraints that she was in on like the wheelchair, and all hell breaks loose pretty much. So after being freed by the antagonist, Helen climbs out the window, breaks into another section of the hospital, steals a nurse's uniform, leaves the hospital, and runs back to Trevor's apartment. When she gets to the apartment, Trevor is actually booed up with, you know who we were suspicious of at the very beginning of the movie? Her name was Stacy. I momentarily forgot. Trevor is newly booed up with Stacy, and we know it's new because they're literally repainting the walls a different color in the apartment because she has just moved in. And I'm not gonna lie, that shade of pink on those walls is ugly as fuck. So upon seeing this, Helen pretty much realizes like the life that she knew before no longer exists, and she leaves Trevor and Stacy, and she hears Candy. Oh no. And while all of this is happening and Helen is leaving and frustrated and flustered, she hears the antagonist saying, they will abandon you. All you have left is my desire for you. Helen goes back to Cabrini Green, where she finds a mural that illustrates the antagonist's backstory, and then she stumbles upon his lair. She literally sees him laying on this like, I don't know what it's called, like this big ass table in the lair, and she tries to kill him. Obviously it doesn't work, and so he brings up again like, oh, it's you or baby Anthony, like are you gonna sacrifice yourself for the baby? At this point, the antagonist released the bees on Helen. I don't know if these are the same bees that were released upon him like however long ago, or new bees. I don't know how it works. Either way, some of them actually go in her mouth. It's disgusting. They go in her mouth, they also bite her and just swarm her. And I'm not gonna lie, it really gives like the way that it's done, if I can show a picture I will, but it's kind of like if you ever watched The Addams Family and seen Morticia Addams with her husband, I forget his name, I'm sorry, like the way that he dips her when they dance or like before they kiss and stuff like that, it's kind of that same position that the antagonist has her before he like puts the bees into her mouth. Helen passes out again. I mean, at this point, guys, if you're of age, take a shot every time Helen passes out in this movie. I promise you, you'll be in for a good time. But yeah, Helen passes out and she wakes up in the antagonist's lair and she finds one of his hooks. So I'm assuming he like doesn't have the same hook. I'm assuming he just has a surplus of them. Like, does he have an inventory? I don't know how it works. But she finds his hook and she takes it and she heads out. It was always you, Helen. So at this point in the film, I don't know if it's just an insinuation or if it's just blatantly like that's the canon. I haven't done any research into it. I just watched the movie. apparently Helen is the white woman that the antagonist originally fell in love with, like, before he got murdered. I don't know if this is like a, I don't know, like a reincarnation type of thing, like a soulmates across timelines. I don't know how it works, but either Candyman thinks that Helen is that woman, or Helen actually quite literally is that woman. Either way, it's a damn mess. So we find out that baby Anthony is like in the bonfire. The bonfire's not lit, but he's literally at the bottom in the pile for the bonfire. And Helen is going to look for him with her hook, but Jake, he's like scoping out the scene because he, I guess, always has his head on a swivel. I mean, as he should. And he sees something going into the bonfire, something with a hook for a hand. And so he assumes it's Candyman, and he goes to gather up his friends and the people in the neighborhood, because now it's time to start the bonfire. So everyone comes out to watch the bonfire. The antagonist is trying to stop Helen while she's crawling through the bonfire to try to save baby Anthony, and she eventually fights him off, but they both end up getting caught on fucking fire. Fortunately, baby Anthony is saved. The neighborhood puts Helen out, but you know, she does end up dying. She dies. So before Helen is put out, Anne-Marie does get the baby back, so the little blessings. Anne-Marie and baby Anthony are safe and sound. Helen dies. Before like the big like finale all happens, the antagonist is in the bonfire. He's on fire and he's yelling and screaming for Helen to come back to him, blah blah blah. And after Helen dies, shortly after Helen dies, he dies and releases a huge like swarm of bees just fly out of the bonfire. So now we're at Helen's funeral, which initially only has 4 people. I think it's Trevor, what's her name, Stacy. I don't remember who the other 2 are. I think it was Purnell and somebody else. But eventually the neighborhood from Cabrini pull up. Anne-Marie and Jake and the rest of the neighborhood show up, and Jake had Helen's hook, and he drops it on top of her casket in the grave. And it's a very somber moment. After the funeral, we're back with Trevor. I can't stand Trevor. But he's in the bathroom crying, and he's reminiscing and feeling nostalgic about when he came home from work, and Helen, after she got, attacked in the restroom, was cooking him a romantic dinner. And he's crying, and Stacy keeps going and banging on the bathroom door, asking him like if he's okay, and he's like, yeah, I'm okay. And then she's like, okay, so can you help me with dinner? And then he's like, yeah, I'll be there in a minute. And then she's like, okay, well, when you're ready, like, can you just do the salad? And it's just a lot of back and forth, and it's very clear that their relationship is rocky. So Trevor's in the bathroom. He ends up saying Helen's name 5 times in the mirror. He's like, Helen, oh Helen, oh Helen. And you know what Helen does? She appears behind him. She's like, oh, what's wrong, Trevor? She has her hook and she kills him. And Stacy, she hears all this commotion coming from the bathroom, and she runs in. She sees Trevor. He's laid out in the bathtub, dead. And that, my loves, is the end of the movie. So now I'm going to get into my Memento moment, which is something very new on the channel. Please let me know if you like it. If you do, please leave a like, maybe comment, and subscribe. So firstly, why did I want to talk about this movie? To be honest, I wanted to talk about this movie because this was my first introduction to a black antagonist. I have always loved horror. My oldest brother put me on to so many horror movies. My mom also really loves horror. She watches like Insidious and The Conjuring, whereas my brother, he put me on to like Saw and like Texas Chainsaw Massacre and like Freddy Krueger, like Nightmare on Elm Street, and Jason and stuff like that. So I've always loved horror, but something I noticed from a young age when watching horror was that the black characters, if there were any, they were oftentimes killed within like the first few minutes of the movie, and if they made it beyond that, their deaths were either like very, very gruesome, or they were stupid. The character was just purposefully killed to get rid of the black survivor. I first watched this, I was so excited because I was like, wow, that's Tony Todd. Like that's the guy from Final Destination, amongst other things. And his voice acting is just iconic. I think I rant about it throughout the whole rest of this fucking video. But beyond that, I was just amazed that there was a black character from the start to the finish of a film, and that not only was this character part of the cast, he was the plot, he was the story, right? Without him, there would be no movie. He's like not the main character, but he is one of the main points and one of the main conflicts within the film. And I think it was just so beautiful and inspirational for me as a child. I was like, wow, I can like horror, and I can see, you know, people that look like me within horror, and they're not just being used for cheap kills, you know what I mean? Like, most of the time, if you have a black character in a horror movie, they don't make any impact within the plot, right? But in Candyman, he drives the plot. He decides how he wants to handle Helen, because if you notice, when Candyman is called the other times with the other people, he kind of appears and very quickly kills them. But he decided, when Helen called for him, he decided to wait and to basically torment her. And that's why he said all of that about believe in me and be my victim, right? Because he wanted her to become his. He wanted it to be a game where she slowly lost herself to him, for it to be something, instead of quick and frivolous, for it to be something drawn out and maybe a little romantic in their sick, dark, romantic way. And you know, he decided to torture her. He decided to have her lose everyone in her life and have her lose her mind and her credibility and her career, to the point where she had no choice but to give in to him. And even in the end, she didn't give in to him, you know, easily. I don't really know. The conclusion is not like, oh my god, like they're still together, or like Candyman is still together, but it's clear that the story is Candyman, I keep saying his name, guys, I'm scared. The antagonist had enough of an impact upon Helen to forever change her soul, to the point, even in death, and he was the cause of her death. He's the cause of her death, and even in death, she is living with the effects of having him in her life. And he's only in her life because she did not believe in him, and she did not respect the lore about, hey, if you call on me, I'm gonna show up, and have complete discretion about what I do about it after I show up. I also really wanted to talk about this movie because it details redlining and gentrification, which are real issues within the black community and within America in general. And when I watched this as a child, I was like, wow, again, horror movies that touch on black people are very shallow most of the time, but this is a horror movie that goes in depth into what it culturally means. What does horror look like culturally and racially and economically for a certain group of people? Like, how do we represent the horror and the fear that this subjugated class of people experience? Right? This is horror with a lesson. This is horror with a commentary, with something to say, with a story and a perspective that's unique and necessary to tell. So what type of viewing is this? This is something you watch if you want a kind of haunting, checks notes, I'm sorry, a haunting, gruesome, thrilling type of vibe. This is something that you will watch if you want a good slasher, and it really truly is a cult classic. Okay, at this point, guys, I'll just be transparent. I'm bare reading off my notes here. I have them open on the Google Docs. I'm just reading off. How did this movie impact me? I would say this movie impacted me because it made me more excited about black representation in horror. I mean, the concept of, wow, there can be a black actor in a horror movie that doesn't get killed within the first 5 minutes, or who isn't, like, you know, killed in a very dumb and or gruesome way. Black actor is in this film from start to finish because he drives the plot. And so it made me more excited to see, you know, more horror that was centered on the black story, which is why I love Jordan Peele. It's why I loved Sinners. It's why I loved Get Out, because those are horror movies that take the horror from a very specific group of people and represent it. It's not just your typical, you know, Scream or I Know What You Did Last Summer. It's, black. It's black. And Candyman in particular, especially when I first watched this as a little child, I watched this and I was like, wow, like they're commenting on gentrification and redlining and like how these things lead to an increased crime rate in certain neighborhoods, and I literally lived that, right? And at this time, when I think I watched Candyman for the first time, I think maybe in middle school. I don't really know. My memory's not that great. If you know me, you know I don't have a great track of time. First watched this, I was also reading about and learning about like gentrification, redlining in school, and I was like, wow, like they're even talking about this in the movie. You know, when you are into a topic or you like are into something and you start seeing it everywhere all the time, it's kind of like that. That's how I felt when I first watched it. I was like, wow, yeah, because more people need to know about gentrification and redlining. And overall, this movie impacted me because it showed me that horror can be representative and scary. Slashers can be funny and stupid and bloody, but they can also teach a lesson. They can provide some type of commentary on something. And I think Candyman is the perfect slasher. Oh my gosh, I just said the name again. I think Candyman, I said it again. Okay. I think the antagonist in this film works perfectly as a commentary and as a lesson, and just as a very scary, as you can tell because I'm shook about saying his name, works very well as an antagonist. Every time that the antagonist shows up is because someone has called upon him, because someone has called into question his story and as such his trauma, and as such racism and violence against black people by white people. So whenever he is called upon, he uses that trauma and that violence that was inflicted upon him to teach a lesson, which is the lesson, honestly, I think, is fear, right? With most of his victims, he doesn't talk to them, he doesn't say anything to them. He particularly was interested in Helen, but that was just because she was like his first love. But with most of his victims, he just very like quickly and kind of brutally kills them. He may play the cat and mouse game depending on how bad of a person they are, but the lesson is the death, right? The lesson is, hey, if you don't believe in my story, if you don't believe in the reality that I was a black man, that I was wealthy, that I fell in love and I was murdered for it because of racism, if you don't believe that and you call into question or you make it a joke and you belittle it, I will show you the truth behind my trauma. I will show you the truth in the wrath and the violence that I've experienced by putting it and inflicting it upon you, right? And it's not you that will live with the lesson, it's your family. Or people in your vicinity, not even just your family, it's the community, right? The congregation, so to speak, as he said to Helen earlier in the film. The whole point is to teach the community and the congregation a lesson, and that lesson is to be afraid, is to constantly be aware of your closeness to danger and death and violence because of your race and the neighborhood you live in and the amount of money that you make. If you are not someone who's in the vulnerable, who's susceptible to that danger, you being someone that is outside of the danger, like Helen and Bernadette, and coming in and trying to dabble and take and profit off of, right? Because in academia, the profit with a good thesis is recognition and is status and is people taking you seriously in the community. So yeah, they were going there to profit. That's why they kept convincing themselves, even though there's gangs and there's crime and there's death, they were like, yeah, well, this will make our thesis good. And, you know, if we have a good thesis, you know, we'll get a lot of good rep in the community and academia, and we can use that to build our careers, right? They were using the trauma and the violence and the death that was happening in these communities that they have nothing to do with to try to get in profit, right? And so that lesson is, if you're someone that is susceptible to it, be afraid. But if you're someone that also thinks you can profit off of it and take it and manipulate it into something that it shouldn't be and that it's not, you can fall victim too. And it's very scary because at the end of the day, all of this happened because of racism. it's just, I don't know how to explain it. There's such a lesson in this story that a wealthy black man fell in love with a wealthy white woman and was murdered because of it, and then became a folklore. And then that folklore, he goes around and kills people who call upon him, right? He's not just going around recklessly killing anybody. He's not Lestat. Sorry. He's going around and killing the people that are daring to call upon him. That means that the lesson requires an audience. And if you think about, well, why would the lesson regarding Candyman require an audience? It's because I don't think there was any type of audience that mattered when he was murdered, right? There may have been witnesses and there may have been an audience, but that audience was part of the people that were killing him and or to join him dying. But there was no audience to tell the story of the man who was brutalized because he fell in love and because of the color of his skin. So I think it's like something about, yeah, we're teaching this lesson. The lesson is fear. The lesson is to be afraid, and love and violence can change someone's life and they can have no power to fight against it. And I think that's also part of why he kind of very just brutally and swiftly kills his victims, because it's like, yeah, that's kind of what happened to him. It was a brutal death, and it happened swiftly in the sense that, not that it didn't take long, but it happened swiftly as in he went from being alive and well to tortured and tormented like that, and he couldn't do anything to stop it. So I think he does the same thing to his victims so that the communities that they live in learn to fear and have a very real knowledge and awareness of, hey, I'm black, I'm poor, there's violence around me because of that, and a lot of that, if not all of it, honestly all of it, stems from white people, right? And the white people that are coming into my community and trying to make a story out of it. I can't think of a succinct message, but this is exactly why I felt like talking about the film, because I feel like it makes you think so much about how race ties into horror, right? And how can that be translated into a good film that sends a message and that brings awareness to this community. So with all that being said, Mimaska, will you watch it? That's all I have for you today. This has been Malia's Room. I hope that your day has been going well, or that it got a little better with this video. I'm Young, Jane. Hasta luego. Bye.